Hello and welcome to another episode on our Photoshop tutorial brought to you by OneLearn. We have been giving you introductions into the Adobe Photoshop application, and we're about to start working fully on the Adobe application, the application itself. But before we do that, there are some basic things I need to explain, some basic things I need to tell you about before we get started. So in this video, we're going to be talking about raster files. We'll talk about image size, image data size, dimension, and resolution as it pertains to Adobe Photoshop application. We are going to move directly into making use of our Adobe Photoshop application. But before we do so, there are some things we need to talk about. There's some things we need to really discuss so that you can understand the beginning stages of the use of the application Adobe Photoshop. Yes, Adobe Photoshop can be a very complex application if you really do not understand what is going on. So let us try to give an insight into exactly what we are doing when we are working on the beginning stages of Adobe Photoshop. Of course, we have to understand some of the terminologies that are going on. So let's just get started. In the beginning of our course, we talked about Adobe Photoshop working basically with raster images. The manipulation and creation of raster images. Yes, you can work with vector files as well, but we work basically with the creation and manipulation, editing, coloring, stuff like that on raster images. And we talked about what raster images are about. We said raster images are made up of pixels. And we also said vector images are made up of lines and curves. So we'll know that raster files are made up of tiny boxes. That's what we call pixels. The tiny boxes. So these boxes come together with various degrees of colors, different colors, all combining together and forming what we call a raster file or raster image. So that's basically a raster image. So what do we do about this? Okay, how can you tell what a raster image is? One way you can tell what a raster image is when you zoom into it. Now this on your left side is a raster image. Now you can see this particular image that's been zoomed over here, and you can see that when you zoom into it, it is made up of pixels. You can see the pixels. Now these pixels, it doesn't really mean much when you really look so closely into the pixels. It doesn't really mean much. You can't really tell what the picture is all about, but if you zoom out, you will see that all these small boxes or pixels have actually come together and form what we can clearly see and understand as an image. Okay, so just for example, I'm going to zoom into this picture. It has already been done for us, but I'm going to zoom in there so you just see what I'm talking about. Okay, so you can see the small boxes. I can see them, of course. You can see the boxes, and you can see a lot of tiny boxes, all with a specific color. You will notice that each box have its own color, and they are all coming together to form an image. That's what a raster image is. So when you're working on Photoshop, you're basically working on manipulating these boxes in order to create an amazing graphic file. So that's one of the most important things you need to know about Photoshop. So once you are working on manipulating photos, manipulating images, you are manipulating raster files. Okay, next thing we need to know is, okay, sorry, we already talked about this, so I'm going to zoom into this just to give you something else, just to tell you. Okay, you can see as we zoom in, we see different boxes, and each of these boxes, they have their own colors. Now I want to show you one of the limitations of working with raster images. The problem with Photoshop is basically that raster images have a limitation. It's very bad, but it has a limitation. So if you're working with raster images, it means you have to know this limitation and you have to know how to overcome it. Now raster images, like we said, are made up of pixels. Now these pixels are tiny boxes. Okay, as you can see now, these boxes are forming this particular photo. I'm going to select the photo. Now in this box, this photo that I've selected are made up of tiny boxes. Now the limitation of raster images is in the scaling. Okay, so we are going to show you, I'm going to demonstrate. I've already zoomed. You can see right now, you can see this picture clearly, right? Yeah, you can see the picture clearly. So I'm going to zoom out, make the picture smaller. Of course, as it's smaller, you can still see the picture. Yeah, yes, too is smaller. Yeah, it's really small, of course, but the picture is still very clear. But I'm going to do something now. Now that I've made it really small, remember I made it really small, I'm going to increase the size. One thing you will notice is the picture is no longer clear. Now what really happened here? When we reduce the size of the image of that particular raster file, the tiny boxes that were in that particular picture, in that particular raster file, became smaller. They had to be compressed. Okay, they had to be compressed when we zoomed or when we scaled the raster file and made it smaller. They had to be compressed, so we had less tiny boxes than we had before we scaled it. So when we decided to scale back up, those tiny boxes don't increase, they remain small. That's the problem with raster. That's the limitation with raster file. If you scale a file, make it smaller, the tiny boxes, the tiny pixels, they all get compressed. Yes, it will still be clear because the picture is smaller. To the human eye, the picture will still look good. But if we increase the file again, since we have already scaled that picture, we have affected the small boxes that made up that particular picture. So when we look at this picture right now, we'll see that those small boxes that were compressed are still there. So they are not going to increase, they're not going to multiply once again because we are increasing the size of the file. It doesn't work that way. It means that those small boxes will still be there, and when we increase the file, we'll notice that that particular file is no longer as clear as it used to. This is what we call pixelated. This picture is pixelated, which means that they are very big boxes, and to the human eye, it will seem as if we are zooming into the picture, and it will no longer be as clear as we want it to be. So that is the limitation of raster files. When you scale them, you basically have to control your pixels. You have to watch out for your pixels because it might no longer be clear. So if you're working with a raster file, you have to work with what you know you're going to work with and not have to scale in or scale out. You should try to avoid scaling in or scaling out when you're working with your raster files. Of course, if you have an image that has a very high resolution, you can work with this. Definitely you can work with this. If the image is very clear, you can scale, and of course it is these pixels are actually being affected while you're scaling. It will not be noticeable to the human eye because you have a very high resolution. Now we're going to move on. Now there's some things you need to know when creating a new document or when you're working with a new Photoshop file. First thing is the image size. Okay, the image size is the physical size of your document. You can have it in inches, you can have it in centimeters, okay, files like that. For example, I'm creating a new file. Name, of course, presets. This might differ with the different versions, but you basically have the same settings. Now you can see the width and the height. Width is the physical size You can have it in inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, picas, and columns. These are different sizes. Okay, so this here, I'm just giving you a label, is the physical size, which is the image size. And then we have the image data size, which of course, as in kilobyte, megabyte, gigabyte. So we have 10 kilobyte for this one, 40 kilobyte for this one, 80 kilobyte for this one. Now, one thing to tell you is that each of these files here have the same physical size. So the image size is the same. Let's say, for instance, this is 5 inches, this is 5 inches, this is 5 inches, 5 inches. They are all 5 inches. They are the same, but the dimension is different. Now we're going to look into dimension. Before we look into dimension, you should also know that the resolution of each of these images are different. The first one we have 72 dpi, the second one we have 150 dpi, and the third one we have 300 dpi. Okay, you can notice that with increase in the dpi is also increase in the size. So what the dpi means is that it's dots per inches. So it just tells you the number of small pixels that are being represented in that particular file or image that you're working with. So the more the dpi, the more the resolution, the more the boxes or the pixels that you're going to have in that particular image. So what does this tell you? The more the resolution, the higher your resolution, the clearer your file. That's basically what it tells you. It means that your file will become really, really clear as you increase the resolution. Okay, maybe if you're working for a web, okay, for a screen, let's say for example, you want to design something for your social media, Facebook, Instagram, you can use a small DPI. Of course, 72 is for screen, so it's going to be a very small size. But if you're working for print media, it is advisable to use 300 dpi, because 300 dpi, that is the resolution that the human eye can process. Okay, so if you have 300 dpi, it means that it will be very clear, your image will be very clear to the human eye when you print it out. Like I said, each of these files here are all the same physical size. So for example, if I'm holding these cards on my hand, if I'm holding it on my hand, they're all going to be the same size. Forget about the fact that they are zoomed in here. They're all going to be the same size. But what this just means is that this one here, this number 3, will be clearer than number 1. It will be way clearer than number 1 because it has a higher resolution, which means it is made up of more pixels, which just makes it way clearer. So what you need to know when you're working with Photoshop is what you're going to be working on, the platform you're working for. Then you can consider your image data size. You consider the kind of size you're looking for, and then the kind of size will tell you your dimension. Of course, your dimension is related to your resolution. The higher your resolution, the higher your dimensions. So it's your dimension that's basically making this thing larger, because your dimension is increasing. The physical size is same, but your dimension, which is the red arrow, is increasing. So that is basically how this works. The higher your resolution, the higher your dimension. Your dimension will tell you, usually in pixels, it will tell you the amount of little square boxes you have made up in that particular image. So let's say we have 1,000 pixels here, which means from here to here we'll have 1,000 square boxes. Let's say we have 500, means we'll have 500 square boxes. So basically that's how it works in Photoshop. So if you know what you're working on, you know what you want to work on, what you want to design, then you should know what your resolution, then your resolution will tell you the kind of image size you're going for. So that is basically something you need to understand when if you're going to be working on image size, on Photoshop, on Adobe Photoshop. Now in the coming video we're going to go straight into talking about more on the Photoshop application, but I am just glad that I have been able to explain to you this little concept of image size, image data size, dimension, and resolution as it implies to Adobe Photoshop application. In this video, we focused on, or we explained more on raster files. image size, image data size, dimensions, and resolutions as it pertains to the Adobe Photoshop application. These are some terminologies that we will have to understand before we get started into using the Adobe Photoshop application itself. So now that we've better understood or understand all these terms, we can now go into using the application itself. So from the next video, we're going to get started with using the application.